Hi there. The question could be asked, what good can we do in the realms of the Demiurge? Can we do any good at all? I think this can be answered with reference to the alchemical symbols for salt, mercury, and sulfur. These seem to be the qualities that govern the dualistic worlds of the Demiurge. And these forces are really to be experienced or detected in all the realms of the Demiurge and in all situations. I think that the good flows from the Holy Grail, flows from the soul inside, the heart spark within. And this is symbolized by or has the quality of Mercury in it. And Mercury is a very sacred alchemical substance or condition, which connects us to the supernal worlds in a very indirect way, but nevertheless connects us. And, they say charity begins at home. They say that you've got to remove the mote from your own eye before you, and judge not lest you be judged. But one of the things that can be cultivated, apart from kindness and compassion, is arete, which means virtue, but virtue as a skill. So, the idea of management comes into it, the idea of emotional management, emotional awareness, time management, life management, the idea of being organized. Instead of leading a chaotic life, one tries to lead a virtuous life of a slightly more ordered, slightly more, this idea of cognitive behavior therapy and being prepared. And as I say, expecting or trimming one's expectations to realistic perception, rather than becoming too idealistic and expecting too much from these realms of the Demiurge. So that's sort of, when people are in trouble, there's a spontaneous outburst of compassion and kindness. One thinks of the story of the Good Samaritan, of course. On the other hand, it is possible that, you can spontaneously react in a empathetic or sympathetic or even a kindly way, and you can do more harm than good, because that's a characteristic of the lower worlds, because they're dualistic. The always the seed of one thing is contained in its opposite. So within kindness and compassion, there could be the seed of its opposites lurking away there, ready to pop up, given the right circumstances and conditions, or even simply how the seed falls, and so it's by no means although mercury is a very pure substance, and a very interesting substance, because it sort of has this formula of Metzler, which is a mercurial formula in Kabbalah and magic. And Metzler is an interesting formula which again connects soul to heaven in a very special way, as far as I understand it anyway. And then you go on to sulfur, for which this is the symbol here. And the sulfur condition of doing good is very much quite ironic and contradictory almost, because you intend to do good. I mean, as it says, the road to perdition is paved with good intentions. The road to tyranny is paved with good intentions. The road to ignominy and iniquity is paved with good intentions. And we see this in a lot of institutions and groups and political movements and social movements, and there's always good intentions. In fact, you could say that judging by the results of people's actions, it would almost be better if people didn't do any good at all, or didn't intend to do any good at all, because the good that they do is sometimes worse. The cure that they put in place is sometimes worse than the disease. Um, and it's very difficult. You have to look at each group. So, you have a well-intentioned group of people with good intentions, and you have to look at this group, and you have to think to yourself, what is galvanizing this group? What is galvanizing me to join this group, to become active in this group? Has it got something to do with the use of statistics? Because damned lies and statistics, statistics can be made to kind of justify any opinion and point of view, because they're taken out of context of the empirical use of them, and often can be made to prove anything, really. So that's one thing. You've got to be very sort of skeptical, wary of that. But this actually shadows into insignificance compared to ideology. Very often people see the world through the lens of their personal theories or political theories, and they may even try to make the world correspond to their ideology, to their expectation, to their idealistic desire to make the world correspond to how it should be, and that's very much to do with good intentions resulting in badness, tyranny, and death and torture and all sorts of terrible things might arise from ideology, as history shows, of course. Then you've got to look at whether the group is galvanized, or whether you're galvanized to join the group through anger and resentment, because these, and it may be that the anger and resentment is not really even about the situation or group of people against whom you are angry, or directing your anger, or directing your resentment. It could be something within yourself, unresolved. So again, that's something to watch very much as well with any particular group. Are people being galvanized through fear? Fear and greed are the absolute core fundamental characteristics of the worlds of the Demiurge. Scarcity produces fear. Fear is the main one, actually. I mean, if you trace everything back, including anger and resentment, ideology, everything is to do with fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of other people, and there are so many shades of fear, and so many manifestations of fear. And it could be argued that greed and avarice, which of course is the other thing you've got to look out for in particular groups, if they're being galvanized, if everything is being fueled by greed and avarice, and avarice, has its roots in fear, and as much as greed. And a lot of consumerism is founded on greed and avarice, of course, but a lot of political movements, social movements, are founded on greed and avarice, as they are on fear, as they are on anger and resentment, as they are on ideology and statistics to back all their truth claims up with. So this sulfuric acid of good intentions is very much a characteristic of the worlds of the Demiurge. And then finally, we come on to salt, and this is very interesting. It breaks down into three main sections, as far as I understand, anyway. I mean, basically, you intend to do good, and you act, and you see your actions come to nothing. The simplicity of your actions gets swallowed up in the complexity, or the complexity of your plans gets swallowed up in the simplicity, in a simple misunderstanding of what you're up against. And you can also see your actions, fueled by good intentions, of course, being rejected by somebody, or marginalized in some way, or ridiculed or mocked. And somebody can, just basically take no notice of your good advice, much to your frustration. And you can see that your frustration and anger might even be sort of fueled by this rejection. And then there's the good that you would, you would like there to be world peace. You wish there would world peace, and it becomes sort of a fantasy, really, that people should become good or better than they are. And you're setting yourself up for a fall. It could be that you're frustrated and you let anger take over. And a curious sometimes it leads to satire, sort of Jonathan Swift satire and misogyny as well can arise, and a sort of hatred for the mob, and which you mock. You intend to do good, but you end up mocking people and being rather cruel to people because you just you're so frustrated with the fact that nothing there's no changing the populace, for example, or there seems to be no way of changing them, or not to the extent that you wish they would change. Again, massive expectations fueled by fantasy, fueled by a sort of fantasy world that you live in, where good intentions just have a sort of a magical power to manifest when they actually clearly don't. So that's one thing to watch for. And then finally, the strange idea of using magic or meditation or directed or guided path workings, or some kind of directed energy work to create good in the world. And I don't know whether this has any effect at all on the actual world, but really it's done to make you feel better about the fact that you're not actually doing anything active at all. So if you do some kind of meditation about world peace, and you might think this has an effect on the world, then basically it's about having an effect on you, and assuaging your guilt for not doing more to help the world. But of course, as we just seen, there might not be much you can do anyway, really. But the trouble is with directing energy, is that energy tends to go where it wants, not where you want it to go. So again, the cure could be worse than the disease, and you could actually do more harm than good. Again, all these things are a characteristic of the realms of the Demiurge. So, in conclusion, I think there's a lot of good intentions do come to zero, really. They start at zero and they come to zero, or they might even come to some negative integer rather than a positive integer that you intended. So, instead of +1, you get -1. But there is a curious thing about goodness, that it does seem to flow from the soul awareness. That there's some inner desire, we are naturally empathetic, naturally compassionate and kind. Perhaps this does have some kind of biological survival algorithm attached to it. It has some, evolutionary benefit to it, really. Probably does, especially looking after and being altruistic towards our own species. And this has a way of flowing out of you, kind of, you just sort of see somebody in trouble, and you immediately react and immediately go to their assistance, like the Good Samaritan. But on the other hand, some people, they're full of reactivity. I mean, they just, anything that goes wrong, they go, ah, and their impulse is to go out and help. When in fact they might be doing more harm by doing that, more harm than if they didn't do anything, you see. They might, some people like, if you start crying, they throw their arms around you. That might be not so good, actually. You might be kind of, stifling the expression of somebody's grief or pain or whatever. Whereas what they really need is somebody who just be there objectively, sitting next to them rather than, you know, rather than giving them a bear hug every time they start crying. And you might be sort of, in a way, almost rewarding a kind of wallowing in self-pity, by doing that. Because, at the end of the day, we go into things by ourselves and we come out of things by ourselves. We have a little bit of help from our friends, but it's all really down to the individual ultimately. So this is life in the lower worlds, the realms of the demiurge. This is life in the realm of duality. There is complexity when you want simplicity, and there is simplicity when you want complexity, or when you try to be complex, the simplicity trips you up. You can't see the wood for the trees, and you make calamitous decisions on the basis of that. It's very tough. Basically, the answer is to do good. It seems almost that it's easier to do bad, to do evil, than to do good, really. It's less complicated. There are less ethical contradictions and ethical dilemmas if you don't actually intend to be ethical at all. But on the other hand, being unethical, also your sins will find you out, kind of thing, and vanity is vanity. And your vanity will, pride goes before a fall. So, the unethical person, the ruthless, the exploitative, manipulative, and predatory, they have their day, but they also have their terrible fall. And your cup of iniquity is overflowing, and as I say, your sins will find you out. So, whichever way you try to do good or you try to do bad, whatever you try to do, seems that the realms of the demiurge, sort of like quicksand, swallow everything that you do and everything that you intend. It just swallows it up whole, like a sort of quagmire, like a quicksand, a sort of festering bog, as it were. And this is just simply how it is in these realms. And yet I think that, we can't block ourselves from doing good. You can't stifle the natural urge which could come from the soul to be good and to reflect the good of the good God, realizing that the good that you do may be very, very, very sort of low key and confined almost to charity begins at home, to your own home, to your own four walls of your dwelling place, and that's all you can expect. You expect your goodness to amount to, and yet because it does reflect the good God, and it does originate from your soul, that limited amount of good, as you see it, is in fact a very good thing indeed.